Now streaming live on Facebook, I'm being told.
1 second now. It's setting up your meeting for Facebook Live and setting up your meeting for YouTube Live. So this is okay. Yeah, we are live now.
Ha, we're live.
Yeah, that's great.
It's good to be
So,
alive.
yeah, good day, everyone. So I'm very thrilled to welcome you in our third webinar about software testing with Michael Bolton. I am Armai Sovanesian, also known as FOB, and I am the chairman of the Association for Software Testing Armenia. As you know, we organize meetups and webinars with software testers and coaches to talk about software testing. And now I'm pleased to have Michael Bolton to be our speaker and answer your questions today. You can address your questions in Zoom live chat, Facebook live chat, and also in Slido. And you can see the Slido application URL in the event description. And before you'll start addressing your questions, I have prepared some questions as well. And I'd like to go with my favorite one, Michael. And I'd like to mention that Michael and I have had the opportunity to discuss some topics previously during our meetings and talks, but these are very common questions that many people, many testers are facing during their career. So first of all, Michael, thank you very much for accepting my invitation to be our speaker now. And here is my first question. When we, oops.
Cachas, así mierda, eso, así culéame, así perro.
Block them, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Méteme los huevos, méteme todos los huevos.
You can just
Le voy a hackear toda la computadora a todos ustedes en este momento.
Okay,
Okay, so we're under attack.
Yeah, happening this first time.
Yeah, I always wonder where's the fun in that? You know, I mean, it seems like it's like.
¡Oh, me vengo! Y tu enamorado.
Another one. That's going to happen constantly, I imagine.
Yeah. So,
you might want to enable the waiting room again. How about that?
Yeah. Okay, I have enabled this and will keep my eye on accepting people. So,
the other thing, of course, is to disable. There's another setting where you can disable the camera and the you can mute, have people enter disabled and muted.
yeah.
Which will probably annoy and frustrate them a little bit. It's
yeah.
a wonderful example of how something that is a quality criterion for some people turns into a quality criterion for not nice people. It's this is it turns into an interesting topic because, of course, these days we're seeing a lot of people who want to be quality coaches. And their idea about being a quality coach is to tell those naughty developers not to put bugs in the code. Which, first of all, what, you think developers aren't doing that? You know, and while we're at it, quality is not just about the absence of bugs. Quality is about trade-offs. Quality is about what you're willing to do in order to get what you want from a system, what you're willing to do or pay, and that always involves trade-offs. Anyway, what was the question?
Right. Yeah, and back to our question. So when we perform software testing, then we need to prepare reports for management or stakeholders who usually do not have technical background and they anticipate from us some numbers. So please, can you share your opinion about test reports and how to achieve credibility from the management and stakeholders, and not to give them some numbers, but what we need to give them?
Well, numbers might be okay if there were numbers that had a real bearing on the quality of the product, but there just aren't that many like that. What managers want, it seems to me, is understanding. They want to understand whether the product they've got is the product they want. What they want is maybe evidence of something that you've done. They might want a sense of coverage, how well you've covered the product, how well you've interacted with it, how thoroughly you've examined it based on some model or some set of models. So here's a little heuristic to help with that. If somebody asks you for a number, offer them a list. If somebody asks for how many bugs are there in the product, I will say, well, let's start with the top 5, shall we? That's just great. Got to get that waiting room going. Yeah. Jose Hernandez, God bless you. Boy, there's some really ugly shit out there on the internet, isn't there?
Yeah, sorry for
that. Happy. Having fun there, Jose?
Okay, so removing them.
Yeah, you got to enable the waiting room. That's you
can yeah.
If you want, I can help with that. Yeah.
Okay, removed. Yeah.
Yeah. You need a strong stomach when you're going to be a tester of this sort of stuff, I guess.
Oh,
yeah. Anyway, if they want information, if they want to know something, speak to what they know. Often it seems to me that when they ask for numbers, when they ask for metrics, it's kind of like a kid saying, "Hey, can I use that knife?" Well, sure, but I'm going to watch you closely to see what you do with that knife. The measures and metrics and numbers that we've got in software can be used to inform, but far more often, it seems to me, they're used to misdirect, misinform. So when somebody asks you for a number, offer a description, offer a list, offer a mind map. Sometimes that can be really powerful to show a set of things about a product or about a test process in more than one dimension. Offer people a set of tables if they're interested in that. But mostly offer them a story, because I think that's what they're looking for. They're asking, what's your story? Because what they want to know is, are you on top of it? Of course, the reason that they ask that is because they want to know the answer to another question, which is, am I on top of it? That's what managers are really worried about.
Oh, yeah. So speaking about the metrics, so many people want to measure how testers work. And many people want to use some KPIs for them. What do you think? What's the best way to measure testers' work?
Well, once again, the same issue applies. They don't want to measure testers' work. They want to assess it. And they want to assess it in a reasonable way, and they want to assess it in a way that is understandable or what we would say legible to them, a way that they can read. And numbers give the illusion of legibility, right? It's easy to say, look, this person gets a 5 and this person only gets a 3. Ooh, but what are those numbers based on? Are they valid? Do they conceal information? And I think they always do. Anytime you reduce something to a number, what you're doing is you're taking something complex and putting it in terms of a scalar. Well, okay, let's consider what we really want. What we want is an assessment. There's a bundle of different factors involved in the quality or the skill of a tester. A tester who reports no bugs at all may be super, super helpful to all the other testers on the project. A tester who reports a lot of bugs may be reporting a lot of noise, a lot of bugs that aren't important or that aren't even actual bugs. So beware of that, and instead offer a well-framed story. Now, in rapid software testing, typically when somebody is asking for a testing story, they're asking for what I think to be a story that has three reasonable parts to it. A story about the product, a story about how we came to an understanding of the product, which is a story about the testing, and a story about the quality of the testing. So those three stories support each other in the sense that our story about the product depends on how we've tested it and how thoroughly we've tested and what kinds of problems we look for and how we've decided that there were problems. And it depends too on what testing we haven't done, what testing we haven't done yet, and what testing we're not going to do at all unless things change. And in order for that story to have a warrant, to have a reason for people to believe it and to take it seriously, we need to tell a story about the quality of the testing, how good the testing was, why the testing that we did was beautiful, wonderful, fabulous, helpful, informative testing, and to the degree that it was not, what got in the way of that, what slowed things down, what made things harder, what made the testing that we did less valuable. Anything that slows testing down or makes it harder, any kind of testability problem like that, is something that I believe our managers should know about. Sometimes we can sort those things out ourselves, but sometimes it's hard for us to do that without management's assistance.
Okay, great. So I remember that once you said give them a list, but not the numbers. This is speaking about the report. So we need to give not just the numbers, but to give some information. And this information can include the numbers, but should not be limited only with numbers.
Yeah, you know, if I tell you that a product has one bug in it, is that a good product?
Who knows?
Who knows? Because the bug could be it never ever starts. Now, is that a showstopper product? Well, probably, but for how long? Oh, right, there's a 1 byte change that we need to make, and we make that 1 byte change and everything's okay. Now I tell you about a product that has 400 bugs in it. Is that a good product? Well, 400 bugs, first of all, means 400 bug reports, and maybe there are a whole bunch of reports about the same basic problem, right? A problem that could get fixed right away or really easily. Or maybe what we've got is a product that has terrible problems in it of, you know, all over the place. Or maybe it's got 400 problems or 400 reports about one little aspect of the product that's not that important, where the program manager could say, you know what, if we actually disable that, right, put a switch on that, don't let the customer see it, we're good to go. We only have 3 bugs now that are in some other part of the product. The numbers don't help unless they're framed in terms of what managers need to understand.
Okay, thanks. So speaking about rapid software testing, Michael, with James Bach, you have found its rapid software testing, a context-driven testing methodology. I'd like to ask you to talk about rapid software testing and how you came to the moment to establish a new methodology in software testing and how it helps to software testers and how it helps to development teams and to managers.
Well, James and I both sort of came to our experience of testing starting with working in Silicon Valley in James's case, or in a Silicon Valley-like company in mine. Companies that had to be very fast and very nimble. And in our case, both of our cases, companies that were producing some pretty highly technical products. And that was informed, in fact, by the fact that before we were testers, we were both developers. I was a database programmer, and James was a video game programmer in our earliest days, respectively. And when it came to the point where we were asked to, in James's case, manage a testing group, or in my case, my first job as a tester was to coordinate activities of a bunch of other testers, along with doing testing myself. And being, you know, a sort of energetic people, neither one of us has a university degree, but we certainly knew that we would be well served by studying our craft. So we started looking at the books, and you know, I remember reading a book called Software Testing in the Real World. This wasn't a real world that I was any kind of participant in. You know, in the real world, we had crashing deadlines, and we had incredible bursts of development happening, and highly technical places. We had huge, in my case, certainly in James's case, I think as well, we had huge potential issues with compatibility, because this was back in the day when it's sort of the Wild West. There were lots of different versions of the operating system. There were enormous differences between platforms and video systems and keyboards and displays and BIOSes and stuff that the operating system did not abstract away. Windows gradually started to do that as time went by and so on. Each application came with different drivers and different support programs, so that each application running under DOS could connect with each different kind of video card and each different type of display and so on. It was a mess. The whole thing was a mess. And the other thing that we saw when we looked at the traditional talk about software testing was that everybody seemed to assume that everybody who was involved in the product was following the rules. Now, there were two people who talked about software development and testing in ways that we thought really did reflect the kind of world that we were living in. And those people were Jerry Weinberg and Kem Kainer. And then gradually, as we started looking around, we realized that there were other people who had similar kinds of insights, similar kinds of views, and who were willing to challenge the orthodoxy. For example, there was a woman named Elaine Wyuker. I ask her forgiveness if I'm mispronouncing her name, but she wrote a marvelous essay on the testing of untestable programs. And what it revealed was that those programs that people said were untestable, what they really meant was that they were uncheckable, but you could test them really easily. Because testing is not simply a matter of running the product and putting in some output that you already know about, and then looking at the output, or putting in some input that is prescribed, and then looking at the output. And if the output matches the output that somebody said ought to come out of it, then everything's okay. Well, that can't possibly be true. That can't possibly be true, except in circumstances where all the product is doing is producing input and output. The product is not necessarily okay. The product simply can do something, but it doesn't mean it does something well. It doesn't mean that it does something reliably. It doesn't mean that it does something consistently. It doesn't mean that it does something in a way that follows the customer's task. So here were James and I, and there were a bunch of other people in that space. We discovered as time goes on, we realized, hey, there's lots of people who have noticed this problem with the way that people are talking about testing. So what we created, James initially back in the mid 90s, and what I joined in on, is a style of testing that is focused first of all on people. Now, the product is super important, but it's how the product relates to people that is what matters. People don't get value out of the product, then the product doesn't do the job. I think this principle of the context-driven software movement came from Cam Kainer, which is that the product is a solution, and if the problem isn't solved, the product doesn't work. You know? So, or you could add to that by saying that if the product it solves the problem but does so in a way that's frustrating or annoying or confusing or irritating or engenders impatience in somebody who's using the product, then the product also doesn't work. Or it works, but it merely fulfills some requirement to some degree. So we started with, when we sort of regrouped and reevaluated in 2011 or so, and we wrote the premises, we sort of declared what the premises of rapid software testing were, because we'd been sort of doing this implicitly, intuitively, without saying it explicitly. First premise is that software is all about relationships between people. And software is developed under enormous time pressure and uncertainty. And that considering those two things, we've got to start examining the fact that people screw up. And it's not because they're bad, and it's not because they are incompetent, although whenever we're doing something novel, we are to some degree incompetent because we've never done it before. We've never built something just like this. We are to some degree naive. We're to some degree careless. We're to some degree sloppy, and people are like that. And that's normal. It's not necessarily desirable, but it is normal. It's normal. And another aspect of this is that when we're developing something, we're developing it with a particular person in mind, but there might be other people in mind that we've forgotten. Or there might be people that we're aware of whose interests are in conflict with each other. Somebody wants this and somebody else wants that. Somebody wants more of this, somebody else wants more of that. Well, when you're building a product, when you're focused on building the product, it's easy to focus on something, some people describe it as convergent, right? You're trying to derive something into a particular space. Mm-hmm. Testing is the opposite of that. Testing is a divergent kind of discipline, in the sense that what we're looking for is we're looking for all the space where the convergent stuff doesn't hit the mark. So we have to be aware of all the different people who might be ill-served by the product. And then to help managers decide whether those people matter to those managers or not. Because there's always somebody who doesn't matter. For instance, I mean, we've got a great for instance before. Our interests are one thing, and Jorge Rodriguez, or whoever that person was who was blasting offensive stuff up on here, their interests are another. And I don't care about those people. Or in fact, I care about keeping them out. So, not everybody can be happy. I hope that Jorge has a miserable day, I hope that he's frustrated, and I hope he's angered and impatient by the obstacles that we and Zoom can put up to prevent him from getting in.
Yeah. So this is first time that I saw such kind of things happening on Zoom. So yeah, need to be prepared for this.
Well, sure. And I mean, but there are things that we need to be prepared for that might be more subtle. Like Jorge is probably just a script kiddie, but an older, more grown-up version of Jorge might be a little bit less obvious and a little bit more conniving, and might be trying to steal money from us in ways that we don't notice if we're not careful. So it's important for us people say, oh, think like a user. Well, that's cool. Sure, you should think like a user, but let's think of like lots of different kinds of users, and think how malicious users or larcenous users, people who steal stuff, or invasive users might behave too. Think like those kinds of users.
Yeah. So my next question is about test documentation. And here, many managers request to have some requirements and to do testing against the requirements, creating many documents and having diagrams, write test cases, and etc. So please, can you share about your thoughts about this test documentation, about this paperwork, and also I'm trying to share your articles about breaking test cases addiction. And please, can you talk about also test cases and why do we need to break this addiction? Why it's good, why it's bad, and all your thoughts about this stuff.
Well, I have a beef against test cases, and it's a bias. Okay, I got to say it's a bias.
Okay.
It's a heuristic. My heuristic goes like this: in the vast majority of the cases where people think you need test cases, you don't need test cases. But what you do need is a skilled tester, and you probably need evidence. You need evidence of a few things. You need evidence that you have created a reasonable strategy for testing the product. By strategy, we mean a set of ideas that guide your choice of tests, that guide the design of your testing, that guide the particular tests that you choose to perform, that guide the test conditions that you're examining. Okay, so it's good to have evidence of that. Now, of course, how can you provide evidence that, say, for example, you're a good cook? Well, one thing you can do is you can provide a bunch of recipes, and people can try out those recipes on their own or look at those recipes and say, yeah, that'll probably taste good. But a really good way of doing it would be to cook, right? Actually make something and see what people think of it. And to provide as evidence assertions and testimonies and assessments from other people that what you're producing is good stuff. So I like to identify outlines in various forms, in text or in mind map form, of how I intend to cover the product. First of all, that's got to be in my mind. And I don't mind creating a documentation, personal notes as I do that. In fact, every good scientist takes lab notes and journals his or her work as they pursue it. Newspaper reporters do that, investigative reporters do that, researchers do that, police do that, lawyers do that. Lots of personal notes go on in that. So I don't mind creating that kind of documentation at all when it's helping me. I certainly don't mind creating documentation that I'm going to share with other people to illustrate what I'm talking about, but I also keep in mind, and I advise them to do that too, that the documentation that I produce is a representation, a representation of what I'm thinking about or talking about. And as such, it is intrinsically limited. It incompletely represents what I do, what I'm going to do. So I want that to be on the table. I want people to recognize that whatever documentation I produce under-describes what I'm doing to some degree. Then in terms of evidence, well, there's lots of different ways that I can produce evidence that I've tested and to back up my story or to illustrate it, like tables, diagrams, mind maps that explicate what I've actually tested and outlined, formally prepared test reports. And there are examples of that all over the rapid software testing appendices. You can look those up. But I'm glad that you're bringing up the series that ate my blog called Breaking the Test Case Addiction. I got into a kind of, I got stuck writing that series. I learned something really important, which is if you're going to produce a series of things in your blog, it's a good idea to get it out of yourself before you publish and not to try to publish as you go. At least that's a heuristic that's going to work for me. So documentation is there to assist us in some way or another. Now, as a challenge, I urge testers to do this. If you really want to understand something, take something that you disagree with and create a list of all of the different things in its favor, why you might want to do this. And then if none of those conditions apply, don't do it. For example, here's why you might want to write out a detailed procedure for a test, okay? Number one, it might be very important that you do that test in a particular formal kind of way, as you might do in a regulated environment, or as you might do for a court case, where you're trying to show conclusively that this sequence of actions produces this result. You might want to coordinate the work of several people and to analyze it and to say, all right, well, if these particular procedures are covering these particular risks, then let's have Fob do it and let's not have Michael do that. If there is something important that might happen in a test procedure that you might forget, might be really important, but you might forget it, then it might be a good idea to checklist it or to write it down as part of a formal procedure. If you are preparing something for some other agency where you have the intention of extending your agency to that person, where that other person or that tool is just an extension of you, and you want to be very specific about what that agency is performing or producing, then it's a good idea to write it down. Of course, if it's a machine that's going to do it, you've got to write it down, right? Because a machine won't, well, I suppose you could dictate it using voice dictation software, but it's got to be made explicit for the machine to do explicitly what you want it to do. So all of those things are arguments potentially in favor of writing out a procedure in an explicit and specific way. Well, here's the thing. The people who are using the software are probably not going to follow that procedure. Right? They're probably not going to do this stuff in exactly the way they do that. And what's interesting about it is they discover bugs even though they're not following that procedure. Ha! So, oh, here's another reason you might, it's not that you might want to do it, it's that you might not want to do it. Like if it's cheap to do it, right? If it's inexpensive, if it's easy to maintain, if it makes transfer of information from one person to another easier. But then there's a counter to that, and that is, my understanding of how to test this product was hard won. I had to investigate the product and I had to discover the different things in it. I needed to learn about the product so that I could write out my test procedure. And by doing that, I learned a lot about the product. By doing that without the formal procedure, I learned a lot about the product. So maybe if somebody else is coming along and is going to test the product, maybe it'd be a really good idea for them to learn how to do that too. Now, of course, the counter argument is, but if they've got a test case, they don't need to do that. They can just follow the test case. Well, okay, fair enough. But what if that inhibits their learning? I have this experience all the time. I'm staying right now at a little spot. My daughter is on a bike trip today with a group of friends, and we came up to the country to be close enough to them to bail them out if they get into any kind of trouble, right? If they get into any kind of difficulty that they're going to need a parental assistance with. So we're up here at this place, and we're not at home right now. Well, what did we ask her for? We asked her for her itinerary because we wanted to know where she was going to be going and what she was going to be doing. We wanted to make sure that she was off dangerous routes in her bicycle trip. And so we queried her about this. We asked her, how much money do you have? Well, we didn't ask her for an accounting statement. We just asked her, how much money do you have? She told us, not enough. So we gave her some more. Right? So a lot of the stuff that gets written down is stuff that we don't we don't have to have it written down. We just get our answer. But here's another thing is when we were navigating to this place that we're staying, my wife was giving me instructions that she was getting from mapping software.
Yeah.
Now, she was not following the things from the mapping software that said, okay, turn right here and turn left here and so on and so forth. She was looking at a map. Now, because she was looking at a map and she was looking around and she was trying to make sense of the world around her and relating it to the map, she actually has a better understanding of where we were going than I do, because I was just an extension of her at that point. I'm just following orders. I turn right here, okay, here. But I'm not trying to get any kind of sense of where I am. I'm devolving that to her, and to me that's a bad thing, because as the driver, I want to know not just where to turn, but where I'm going and how I'm getting there. Now in partnership, of course, we can do that. But I miss the days of working just strictly from a printed map, because I feel like I'm losing my connection with the world around me to a great degree. I'm not paying attention to the things that are around me. I'm paying attention to keeping the car right there on the road and, my wife's next set of instructions. So I worry that in the same way, if you're on your own, there's on sat nav systems, there's a voice telling you to do this and do that and do this and do that, and you sort of relax your sense of where you are, your kind of proprioception in the larger world. Well, I don't want to lose that. I want to be really deeply familiar with the product, and you don't get that with test cases. Certainly not in my experience. You start following the test case instead of learning about the product. So that's what I want to do. If I want somebody to learn how to test a product, I don't give them a set of test cases. I give them a task. I say, here's something that somebody might want to do with the software. I want you to try to do that thing with the software. And I want you to tell me about any problem that you see, anything that slows you down, that makes things harder, that you find confusing or irritating or annoying or frustrating, anything that prompts curiosity in you, anything that prompts a sense of frustration. Give me that, because if the product is frustrating to test, I bet it's frustrating to use too.
Every time when someone is asking me what is testing, and I'm remembering how you describe, you and James about are describing software testing, that it's a process of learning and studying the product by evaluating and etc. So every time when I'm going into when I need to start to test something, I'm just not looking at any documentation and anything. So I'm just going and trying and exploring the product by myself to understand, to study the product, and to act like a user. And so this is the best way to understand everything related with the product.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just following, like, for example, I'm thinking back to Armenia, because I visited you in Armenia. It was really terrific and fun and interesting.
Thanks.
I remember I remember one incident, which here's an example of something. Fob is driving me to the site where the class is being held. It was held at a hotel. It wasn't held at your company's normal site. It was held at it's not exactly a hotel, but it's sort of resort-ish restaurant.
Yeah, something like
center. Yeah. So one of the things that you could say as part of your procedure was get in the truck, on the way to the conference center, stop for gas. fill up the tank, and then proceed to the conference center. Okay, so you could do that, and you could say that you'd done that. But here's what that test case wouldn't have noticed. The two guys who were gas station attendants sitting in chairs, maybe 5 meters, 4 meters away from gas tanks, sitting there smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got a test case that you follow, you say, "Yep, Flob got in the car, and Michael got in the car with him, and there are a couple other people in the back, and they went and they got the gas, right, got the petrol, and then they drove on to the conference center. Yep." But here's what I remember about that: looking out and seeing these guys. One of whom got up with his cigarette, went cigarette, and then started pumping gas just a few meters away. They're there in order to preserve safety, right? To make sure you can't fill up. Armenia is one of those countries where you can't fill up the tank on your own, right?
Seems that now you can do it, but not sure about it. So I'm not doing it.
Back then, I guess you couldn't. There had to be an attendant,
Yeah.
if I remember right. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things where you could follow the procedure, but maybe there's something else you might want to notice about that. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have 3 questions in Slido, but I have another question from my side.
Okay.
So there are many people who are just starting their career in software testing, and you have more than 25 or more than 25 years experience, right?
I have I got out of the theater business when I was 27 or 28 years old.
Oh.
So and I just had a birthday, so we're looking at over 30, let's just say.
Yeah. Okay. So what you would suggest or advise them, so who are just starting their career, because many things have changed since the time you took your first steps as software testing engineer, and now you are coaching and giving classes to software testing engineers. And also, can you talk a little bit about the differences too?
So differences between then and now?
Yeah.
Not enough. We're still stuck. I mean, people are still saying a lot of the same stuff about testing that they used to say 30 years ago. Now, some things have been kind of positive, like the Agile movement when it first started out, at least, was a really humanist kind of thing, right? It was oriented towards let's put individuals and interactions over processes and tools, which is great. The trouble I see is that the conversation immediately snaps back into processes and tools and not enough into individuals and interactions. Let me give you an example. Here's a whole team approach, okay? Here's the whole team approach. Yeah. Isn't that a wonderful idea? Everybody in the team contributes. Everybody in the team is responsible for quality. Everybody in the team is responsible for testing. Okay? Everybody in the team is responsible for testing. Well, that sounds like a nice idea. Well, no, everybody's on the team is responsible for some degree of testing, I would say. Like, for example, if you're producing something, let's just say, let's take it out of writing software and let's talk about writing text. If you're writing text for somebody else to read, it seems to me it behooves you to run a spelling checker on it. To notice when there's little red wavy lines underneath it. It behooves you to read it yourself and to read it as critically as you can. The problem is when you're making something, it's hard to get that distance from it. It's just hard for you to look at your, if you're a parent, you know this, to look at your kid and say, all right, what's wrong with my kid, right? Now, you don't want to do that all the time, but you do want to be aware of things where your kid might need help, right? Where your kid might need things from you that you need to help them with. So not everybody who's involved in the product can get that distance from the stuff that they're involved with doing. And that's why we have testers. We have testers because testers are at critical distance from what's being built. The tester's focus is on trouble. The tester's focus is on problems. And that's the first thing I'd say to a new tester. Never, ever, ever, ever forget that the reason that you're being hired is because managers want to know this information, that they want an answer to this question. And more than anything else is what they want to know from testers, which is, are there problems that threaten the on-time, successful completion of our work? Are there problems that threaten the value of the product to somebody who matters? Now, they might say something different, right? They might say, I want you to tell me about a pass-fail ratio. They might say, I want you to provide us with test cases, or I want you to provide us with documented processes and all that sort of stuff. Maybe they want that, but they want that. And I know this, having been a product manager, a program manager. What they want is, are there problems that are going to threaten the value of the product? That's what they want above all. So testers, young testers, never forget that. And next thing is, don't let other people, especially there's some developers who are like that. I don't think it's mostly developers though. I think it's mostly other testers who will try to persuade you that what people are trying to find out is that the product is okay. Don't let people tell you that. Don't let people tell you that. But then there's another thing, which is going to fly in the face of the last two things I told you, which is don't let other people tell you what to do. So there's a paradox it goes right to the heart of rapid software testing, which is we want testers to follow their own path. Now, we want testers to do that in service of testing the product, in service of understanding the product, in service of getting the product, wrapping their minds deeply around the product and finding deep, important, hidden problems in the product. But listen, if you got a way of doing that is distinct from ours, great, do that, and then tell us about it if you would, because we'd like to know it too. But most importantly, don't let people push you around. Don't let old people, people who, people say, oh, I have 20 years of experience in testing, and they'll tell you all this kind of stuff. Well, maybe they have 1 year of experience 20 times. Now, I'm lucky because I've worked in a bunch of different contexts, and I've interacted with lots of people who are working in lots of different contexts. And that helps me to realize that nothing that anybody says appropriate to one context is necessarily a great idea in some other context. So, right from the get-go, I was aware of that what I was doing in a memory management multitasking software utility company was not the kind of testing that you would do at a bank. And the kind of testing they do at a bank is not the kind of testing that you do for Zoom. And the kind of testing that you're doing for Zoom is not the kind of testing that you would do for an online dating service. There's so many different development models. There's so many different contexts in which projects work. There's so many different sizes of companies and places where they are on their evolution. So here's another thing, which is don't let anybody tell you that you're being immature. There's a lot of, quite frankly, bullshit around the word immaturity or maturity. And one thing that I can tell you for sure is the accusation, you're so immature, is a kind of accusation that you hear from immature people, right? From people who don't recognize that maturity is all about being able to survive on your own as an adult. And it's not, it's exactly the opposite of somebody telling you what you're supposed to be doing. And if you need to be told what to do, it seems to me, then you're immature. So don't do that. So question what people, including me, are telling you, which of course that gets really tricky because then you get into the idea of questioning whether you should question me or not, and you question whether you should question whether you question me or not, and things get very complicated.
Yeah, thanks. So, and my last question, and we'll proceed to questions. And I've got a question even in Facebook Messenger. So my favorite question is about books related to software testing. And what books you'd like to suggest to people who are in software testing and are interested in reading books?
Well, there's something you've done just there, a little move that you did, which is, I think is really wonderful, which is you didn't ask about software testing books. You talked about books related to software testing.
Yeah.
So that's nice. I really like the way you did that, because I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that all books are related to software testing in some way, or you can relate them to software testing. That's a useful little trick, which is from any book that you're reading or any article that you're reading, ask, how might this inform my testing? How might this help me to learn something about testing? Now, this week's favorite answer is a book called Calling Bullshit. And it's by Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West. I just finished reading it. And it's about examining claims that people are making and trying to evaluate whether they're worthy claims, whether they make sense or not. And there's sections in there on quantitative stuff, but there's also an analysis of why people say things that aren't true, or what might motivate them to do that, how they're not true, various ways in how they're not true. So in general, one really rich source of nutrition for the testing mindset is books on how you might be fooled and how people might fool themselves. So Calling Bullshit is one. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is another. Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely is another one. Then books related to systems and systems thinking. There's a book by Philip Ball called Critical Mass. And weirdly, he doesn't mention systems thinking in the book, but the book is all about that. Another really interesting systems thinking book is a book by Doug Saunders. Who's Doug Saunders? Doug Saunders is a columnist for the Globe and Mail, a newspaper in Canada. And he wrote a book called Arrival City, Arrival, not a rival city, but Arrival City, okay. Which is a book about, he calls it the last great migration, the migration of people from the country to the city. The migration of people from the country in one country to a city in another country. And that's a book about systems. That's a book about how choices that governments and societies make about how they're going to handle this move affect what goes on in the cities where these people are arriving. And it shows how people need complicated social networks of interactions between people from their own culture. They need who are already in those cities, hence Arrival City. But it also talks about the stressors on those systems and how various governments have dealt with them in various ways. How people, in order to fit into the societies that they're arriving at, need support from the government so they have a path to property ownership and they have a path to citizenship. Well, what does that have to do with testing? What it has to do with testing is a reminder that things don't happen in isolation, that culture plays an important role on how things work generally, that for things to fit, there need to be systems and structures in place that allow things to fit. That, that's an example of a book that on the face of it doesn't have anything to do with software testing. And if you consider it more deeply and more broadly, has everything to do with software testing. I am also looking right now, I've been reading a book called The Master Algorithm, which is a book about various forms of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that's about testing too, of course. There's a much more testerly kind of book on the subject called Rebooting AI, which is about how not to be fooled by AI. In fact, I tweeted something on GPT-3 just the other day by the authors of that book. It's an article in the Harvard Business Review, if I remember correctly, by Gary Marcus and Ernest Davis. And they've done some wonderful bits of testing to show how AI is not really I. It's in fact, they point out that a GPT-3 is a somewhat better bullshit artist than GPT-2, but it's still bullshit. There's no recognition of the world in any kind of formal sense. These things don't apprehend the world, and therefore, I would argue they're not intelligent. They're sophisticated and interesting. But what they're mostly interesting about, it seems to me, is how we can fool ourselves into believing that something is intelligent when it's not really. Shazam was a wonderful example of that. When my wife first showed me Shazam on her iPhone, that was the moment at which I said, okay, I'm getting an iPhone. Because it seemed kind of miraculous to me. This was the first time that I'd encountered something where, in software, where I said, wow, I have no idea of how they can do that quickly and that richly, how the application recognizes music. You hold it up to a speaker and there's a song or a piece of music playing, and within almost an instant, it's really, really short time, it can recognize that. So I had to go in and look into how it actually does that. And it's really amazing, but that's not intelligent. The people who designed it were intelligent, and very, very clever stuff. But it's easy for us to say, "Wow, that thing is so smart," when it's not really smart at all. It's just very sophisticated data processing. So, in the appendices to the rapid software testing class, there is a book list of, I don't know, the 150 some odd books that have influenced us in various ways along the way. And I'm leaving out something else which is useful to read, which is fiction. Or even, Jerry Weinberg remarked that his favorite book to give to developers is Alice in Wonderland, which is a book about illogic and paradoxes and things not being what they seem, and how something can turn from something into something else. Science fiction is really wonderful at that, for identifying plausible outcomes of stuff that looks good on the face of it, turns out not to be so good after all. So you can read anything and ask yourself this question: how could this help me to be a sharper thinker as you go? And at that point, you got your hands on a testing book, and many, many books are like that. Even a bad testing book, right? Even a bad book on testing can be helpful if you're looking at it critically, if you're looking at it with a tester's eye.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I think that everyone was writing down the names, what they need to add to their reading list.
Yeah, anything by Jerry Weinberg, of course, is Money in the Bank. All of Kem Kahner's work, it seems to me, is worthy. There's stuff on that we disagree with Kem about, That's all right. That's going to happen, right? Reasonable people are going to disagree because of context. My brother and stepbrother once said something really wonderful, which is that most arguments appear to be about conclusions when they're really about premises. So I thought it was really insightful. And I asked him, where'd you get that? Come on, you can't be that smart to have come up with that on your own. And he said, well, I don't think so, but I've looked all over the place and I can't find that. So maybe he did. He is a very smart guy, to be truthful.
Hey. So I'd like to read a message from my friend who is asking, so how to keep right balance of testing and regression checks in a process of development?
Well, again, I like the little gloss he put that on that, in a process of development. You know, when it comes down to it, I understand the motivation of developers and builders to move quickly, right? Developers and other people who are building and designing the software, they want to move fast. They want to keep their forward momentum going. But it seems to me reasonable to require them, it's reasonable for managers to require them to check their work as they go. And so the first part of my regression testing strategy, the first idea and the set of ideas that guide my choice of tests is to ask, to what degree are programmers feeling disinclined or even pressured not to check their work as they go? And if they are in an environment where they're not being encouraged to do that, where they're not mandated to do that, that ramps up the risk. If I can help them with that, I will. You know, if that's something they would like my help with, I'll certainly try to do that. But that they are not doing it, it seems to me presents a risk. A big set of risks to the product and to the project, because that's the first line of defense against regression problems, right? So anything that leaves the developer's workbench stands a chance of burying whatever errors the developers have made there. So part of my strategy is to help the developers with whatever they need in order to make that faster and easier for them. But I also need to enlist management's help. I'll go with the developers together to say, listen, you know, you're asking for features at a rate where the developers can't be confident that they're not introducing problems. So my strategy is to make sure that the developers have the space and the time and the incentives and the lack of disincentives they need in order to not to introduce regressions in the first place. A smattering of automated checks at higher levels in the developer level might be a good idea. But you know, many years ago, my friend Adam Goucher wrote a blog post because he asked me if I had written one on it, and I hadn't yet, but he remembered me saying it. That most of the time when you're writing regression checks, when you're developing regression checks for a product, most of the value in doing that is consumed in the doing of it. In other words, you find bugs as you're writing those regression checks, and the developers fix those bugs, and therefore thereafter, after those bugs have been fixed, the regression check never finds that bug again. So my you know, if you want to do that, well, then maybe what you want to do is you want to do some testing, thinking that you might want to write a regression check for it, and then never actually writing the regression check for it, because it turns out in the end you don't need it, because developers aren't just sitting there saying, how can I make this problem happen in a way that fools all the regression checks? They don't do that. So here's what I would suggest instead. What I would suggest is go over the product reasonably frequently, but when the developers have fixed the problem, test around that. Focus your testing on that risk. If the developers say, oh, you have to, or the program managers say, oh, you have to run all the same tests you've ever run before, because if you don't, we have no idea where something might have broken. Well, that's a severity 0 project risk. If you have no idea where something might have broken, then what you've got is a product that's out of people's intellectual control. If I were doing that, what I would suggest is setting up various means. Coverage analysis tools are like that. Network sniffing tools can help with this. Try to find the places in which the product might have unanticipated consequences. And would you mind me showing you a little illustration of this? Because I'd love to do it. And the only catch is to try to figure out where in my vast list of presentations I've stashed yet another version of this. Oh, there it is. Good. All right. I want to show this because I think it could help a lot of people to think about this.
Okay.
This is something called, and I will share my screen now, a chord diagram. This chord diagram shows it shows a number basically of cases in which, for a program called Metomatic, we set up a bunch of bots. Metomatic is an application whose job it is to help people find a time when they can all meet in common, right? So people send to the tool times when they're available, and then the tool says, oh, look, here's a time when all of these people are available at the same time. So interestingly, it doesn't schedule the meeting, it just points out when the people are available. All right, so these bots responded to requests for a meeting. But what it's showing is that there are only, if you look around the outside of it here, I'll use my pointer to show you. You can see my, can you see my cursor there, my mouse pointer?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you'll see that there are 3 points involved with this interaction. There's a scheduling thing, and then there's a respond and answer. Those are 2 endpoints in the product's API. All right. So let me go up 2 slides. 1, 2. All right. This is a depiction of the navigation that was going that happened through the tool on day 1 of a class where we introduced people to this tool, and this was the subject of the Rapid Software Testing Applied class that James was teaching and I was co-teaching. So what we did was James had already created a log file analyzer to read the logs and to identify which endpoint had called which endpoint. Okay. So what you're seeing here is not 3. I mean, if you look, there's respond, and there's schedule, and answer must be on here someplace. There's answer. Those are the 3 things that I showed you in the previous diagram. These are the endpoints that students hit through the course of doing the testing. And here's the amazing part. This one, and this one, and this one were endpoints that we didn't know about. In particular, this one, we didn't know that that endpoint was there. The developer hadn't told us about it. A developer might not have been aware about it or might have forgotten it. So what this illustrates is the power of humans experimenting with the product, exploring it, and gaining experience with it. It's not to say that this stuff here is bad. It's not to say that this is bad. It's just to say that it interacts with the product in a different way. That's the same kind of diagram illustrated in the same, or the illustrating the what the students did versus what the tool did. So the point is not that automation is bad, it's that it gives us one kind of superpower. But there are other kinds of superpowers that testers have, including the capacity to look at these two diagrams and say, well, isn't this interesting, right? That's a powerful thing, it seems to me, but tools won't do that. Tools won't stop and say, oh, is this even a worthwhile test for me to do? Tools will never say, oh my God, I'm wasting my time. I've done this over and over and over again. Or a tool won't say, you know, there's something I haven't covered here. I think I should probably cover that. Tools won't do that. But testers will, real testers will.
Yeah, and if we'll start speaking about the differences between human testing and automation running by machine, it will take us too long because I know your thoughts about this.
Not too long. Let's just say this.
Okay.
Tools don't do testing.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no automated testing. There's no manual testing either.
That's for sure.
And sometimes we use tools to mediate our interactions with the product, and sometimes we interact with the product directly. I'm trying to push this out little by little. I'm going to do a big blog post on it pretty soon. But let's replace the idea of manual testing with experiential testing. Testing to gain experience with the product, testing in which we obtain experience with the product, testing in which we explore what experience with the product might look like or feel like. Get experience with the product. And let's not call it manual testing anymore. That's for techno-chauvinists. People who think that automation is better than people. Automation isn't better than people. Automation is something that people use in order to help them get certain stuff done. But it's the people that are the important thing.
Yeah, I'm very happy that during the last, let's say, 5 years, this separation between the manual and automation testing is becoming lower and lower and lower. So I hope that maybe, yeah. So when I'm talking with people about this, I'm saying, yeah, they are saying that, yeah, okay, so that was wrong. This manual and automation, yeah, there is testing, but also there are people who are saying that there is also manual QA engineering and some other word.
No, nobody else talks about their work that way, and nobody else lets anybody else talk about it that way. No, nobody goes to a manual doctor, right?
Yeah.
Nobody reads manual journalism. No, designers don't do manual design. My wife is a designer, and if you asked her, so do you do manual design or do you automated design? She'd look at you funny. Of course she would, because it's a silly question. Nobody does manual management or automated management.
Yeah.
Why do testers let other people talk about them that way? And why do testers talk about themselves that way? It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Some kind of people think that QA sounds well.
Managers assure quality. Developers assure the quality of their own work. Testers assure the quality of their own work. But by that reckoning, everybody's in quality assurance, right? Everybody assures the quality of their own work. And management has the power to deploy people and resources and budget and money and time towards deeper assurance of that quality. But no, testers don't do quality assurance separate from anything else. By, testers can't assure quality. That's an old story for me.
Yeah, so same here. Okay, Michael, so let's get to answer some questions from Slido. And so first question that has 3 likes. So what is the everyday receipt for beginning a high-level testing engineer, becoming a high-level testing engineer? What should be done daily to have a great success? Could you share your experience?
I missed the very beginning of that question. I think I got the rest of it.
Oh,
What were
sorry.
the first few words?
What is the everyday recipe for becoming a high-level testing engineer?
The everyday recipe for becoming
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
recipe. Well, there's lots of recipes, right? You might want to think of them in terms of a cookbook rather than a recipe. Or you might want to think of an ingredients list, and you can prepare whatever kind of test engineer you want to be. I'm sort of weird about the term test engineer, but I'll go with it for the moment. Look, once you've absorbed the idea that your job is to find problems in the product, one way to do that is to consider the things that you're inclined to do and that you're good at and build on them. And then the things that you're maybe not so good at and see if learning a bit of them might help. And of course, if you start to study something, much of the time you'll find out that it was a lot more interesting or a lot easier or a lot more powerful than you might have thought from the beginning. So first of all, learn about how people can be fooled. That's very important for a tester, it seems to me. So study cognition and study psychology and study deception. You could study magic. That could be kind of fun to see how people get distracted and how people get fooled into believing that something is there when it's not, or something that isn't there when it is. Study general systems. A great place to start with that is Donella Meadows' book, which I think is called Thinking in Systems. Jerry Weinberg's book, An Introduction to General Systems Thinking, which is in some senses a tougher read, but not because the words are hard really, but because the concepts are so rich. By all means, learn about technology. That can help a lot. Learn about how software is built. So study the development process where you are and the development process elsewhere. Learn how to be an observer. I've got a new book. It's with me at this place where we're staying, called I think it's called Visual Intelligence. I can see it. It's sitting there over on the nightstand. So learn how to observe and to analyze the things that you see. Learn mathematics. Learn statistics. Learn the aspects of administration and how stuff gets sorted and organized. Learn something just went into my mind and left it again. So learn how to remember stuff, right? learn how to take notes. Study note taking. That can be a very, very useful and powerful ingredient. Learn how to program. That's okay. If you're interested in learning how to program, learn how to program. And if you're not interested in learning how to program, learn how to be persuasive and seductive. Learn how to charm people into doing programming work for you. Learn about management, because management, if you want to become a manager, you're going to need to do that. If you don't want to become a manager, you want to know what motivates managers. Learn about marketing and sales. You could do that. Learn about critical thinking. I guess that goes back to the idea of studying how people can be fooled. Learn about the business domain that you're working in. And there are lots of different ways of doing that. I think some testers kind of underuse that, underemploy that. You know, if you're working in a particular domain, hang out in social media forums or at the indeed at meetups if we ever get to have live meetups again on the subject of the domain that your software is representing and modeling. If I were working, for example, supposing I got a job working an airline reservation system, one of the things that I'd want to do is I'd want to hang out in forums where people are complaining about airline reservation systems. I'd want to go to meetings and conferences, you know, for the airline industry and talk with people there about how they work with that kind of stuff. You know, even if you're not flying somewhere, go to the airport, go up to the counter, and you know, I've done this kind of thing before. Look, I know this is kind of weird, but I'm a tester for a software company, and after work, would you mind if I bought you a drink or you know, bought you dinner and asked you about this sort of stuff? That now that sounds really strange, but what's funny about it is that people are often delighted to tell you about what they do and the kind of problems that they have in doing it, especially if they have any kind of belief that maybe you can help them out with that. So on a number of occasions, I've talked to tech support people at various companies and said, can you tell me a little bit about this? I mean, what other kinds of problems are you seeing in this thing? That give me ideas on how to test stuff. So there's your cookbook, right? There's your book of ingredients, and the recipes are up to you. Because having been offered these ingredients and some brief descriptions of how you might put them to use in a delicious dish of a testing career, it's up to you to combine those ingredients in ways that work for you.
Okay, thanks a lot for answering. And another question. What was the most memorable and challenging bug that you have faced and solved on your own? Really interested.
I've never solved a bug on my own. Well, I mean, only as a developer, when I'm writing code, I've solved bugs on my own. But as a tester, you don't do that. My favorite bug probably is a bug that was associated with an email money transfer system at a point where it has to stop for people who do not themselves have online banking enabled and don't want to enable it. So the way the system worked was this. Fob, I owe you money, so I'm going to send you money, and I write I go to my bank's website, and I arrange to send an email money transfer to you. You receive the email from me, and it says, you can go to one of these 7 banks that support, or maybe even more than that support email money transfer. And you look at that and you say, I don't believe in this online banking thing. So there's an option for people like you to receive a check. And in order to send a check to you, the bank wants, my bank, or at least the system that brokers this transaction, wants to know what account, it doesn't exactly write a check, but it will deposit it in your bank even though you don't have online banking enabled yourself, okay? So it's an electronic funds transfer. Well, what they have to know is they have to know your bank account. And of course, since you're not into email money transfer yourself, you don't have online banking enabled, you probably don't know how to look that up. So what it says is, go get a check from your bank and look at the numbers at the bottom of the check, and it presents an example of a check, and it says, feed those numbers into this system. The first 4 numbers are the numbers associated with your bank branch. The first 3 numbers are the numbers associated with your bank. So fill those in. And then the next few numbers are associated with your branch. So fill those in. And the next few numbers are associated with your actual account. So you fill those in. All right. The bug was something like 2/3 of the problems that were being dealt with by the customer support people surrounded two banks. Only two banks had big problems with this, and we didn't know why. And what was weird was those banks didn't always have a problem with this process, only sometimes. So this was a big puzzle. Why are these two banks having this particular problem? So I looked into it. Through experimenting with the product, I found that there were 7 specific conditions that were in play here, and only one of them had to go wrong for the process to fall apart. Number one was there were 2 different kinds of electronic funds transfers that could be used, and these 2 banks were using the other one. There were other banks that were using the other one, but it wasn't a problem for them. Second thing was the sample check gave 7 numbers for the bank account number. So the example, the little graphic that we were putting up on the screen gave 7 numbers. The first number of which, by the way, was a 0. So here's the 7 numbers. Trouble is that for these banks, we were seeing a fairly consistent pattern where the first number was always a 0. Lots of other banks had numbers, bank account numbers starting with other numbers, but this bank, their numbers that the transactions that weren't going through, they all started with 0. So that was weird. So I went down to one of those banks. It happened that there was a bank branch about 25-minute walk away from the office where I was working. And I went to the counter, and it was just like I described before. I went to the counter and I said, this is kind of weird. I'm not a customer here, but do you have counter checks that you could give me a sample of? And you can write void on it or anything you like, so you know I'm not going to use it. But could you give me an example of a check or a photocopy of a check or something like that? And here's the funny thing about it. The account numbers there started with something other than a 0, but they were only 6 digits. So that was a clue. And I wondered if people were looking at our graphic, which happened to start with a 0, and inserting a 0 at the beginning so the transaction went through. But that Fox, the check number algorithm, because the last number, the account, I didn't realize this before, the last number of the account, it turns out is a check number, a checksum, to make sure that all the other numbers are right. So that checksum should have thrown up an exception to say, oh, this doesn't match the checksum. And in most of the cases where there was a wrong check number, it did. But in this particular case, 1 time out of 10, by accident, the checksum number would be right. So there were some other conditions involved too, but this bug took me the better part of a week on and off to explore and investigate and understand the dynamics and understand the flow. And when I presented this account of it, my description of what was going on, and that I think this is why the bug is like that, the director of development at this organization looked at it and said, this is the most beautiful testing work I've ever seen. This is really incredible. And I thought, wow, that's great. Right? So I asked, so when are you going to fix it? And he says, yeah, we're not going to fix it. What? You're not going to fix it? And he said, no, we're not going to fix it. He says, we got a big overhaul of this whole system coming in about 6 months. And, we can deal with it. It's work for our support people, for our customer support people. But we're not frustrating or annoying enough customers to risk making a change to this process,
Yeah.
such that we would address it. I thought, well, why not? If your bank account number starts with this number, if you're working at these two banks, let us know about it, or here's something you can do to get around this problem. Couldn't you put that on the graphic or in the instructions for something? He says, no, that would just piss off those two banks. So that's an important lesson. You can do really beautiful, really elegant, really thorough, deep investigation of a bug, and at best, you might get a thank you for it. Right? It might be that they'll say, well, this is great. We're really glad to know about this, and we're not fixing it. And as a tester, you've got to be prepared for that. You got to be prepared for the fact that not every bug that you report is going to get fixed, no matter how beautiful your work was. And I accept that. I don't want to. I don't run the development project. I don't make decisions about the product as a tester. That's not my job. That's not the people who make those decisions. They're getting paid the big bucks. They're the ones who get to decide. As a tester, all I want is to be heard. Right? I give them the report. They can do with it what they will. I want to make sure that they know about the risk that I perceive. But if they see a bigger risk somewhere else, that's their call. They get to decide.
Yeah. So finding bugs that have very hard patterns, that's my favorite part in testing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. A tricky bug, a Flying Dutchman kind of bug, right? The thing that you just see it over on the horizon there, and all of a sudden, when you get closer to it, it's gone, right? It's gone around the island, or it's lost in the fog, or something like that. Chasing down those bugs and capturing them, that's fun.
Yeah.
Especially if
so
really
yeah. Okay, let's go to our last two questions, and I think that we can finish our webinar, unfortunately. So, can you recommend some books about psychology, which might be useful for testers?
Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. The Psychology of Computer Programming, Psychology of Computer Programming by Jerry Weinberg. Thinking and Deciding by Jonathan Barron. Tools of Critical Thinking by David Levy. There's another one that's right on the, Calling Bullshit is a little bit about psychology. But there's another one which, again, flew into and out of my mind just there. I suppose in a very important way, tacit and explicit knowledge is like that, right? Harry Collins. It's not specifically directly exactly about psychology, but it's a way, it's about how we know things and how we know more than we can tell, and how knowledge is sometimes embedded in a brain, or in a brain assisted by a set of models. Sometimes knowledge is embedded in the human body, like my knowledge of how to play the mandolin there. That's in my brain, but it's also in my fingers and in my hands. Like the knowledge of how to drive a car with a manual transmission, or the knowledge of how to balance a bicycle. But then there's the knowledge of how we do things around here, cultural knowledge and social knowledge, what Harry would call collective tacit knowledge. So that's a pretty interesting book, which has interactions with psychology. But there's all kinds of books on, there's one I think called How Not to Be Wrong by Jordan Ellenberg. That has a psychological element to it. but the psychology I think that's important for testers is the awareness of how we can be fooled and how not to be fooled. That's the most important dimension of it to me, anyway. And I realized I went through that list fairly quickly. If you want to know, ask Michael at developsense.com, and I will happily provide a list. Or, come to the rapid software testing classes, which are going from September 15th to 18th. There's that one. And then I think James is, that's Rapid Software Testing Explored. And James is leading Rapid Software Testing Applied, the 23rd to the 25th, and other classes are about to be scheduled. Some of them are already on James's website. You can look them up there.
So there was a question about how we can find courses about rapid software testing. So you already answered to that one.
Right, www.rapid-software-testing.com, or my site and James's site. And those two are good places to find out where and when courses are happening.
Okay, and let's go to our last question. It's about quality architect. So have you heard about quality architect role, and what do you think about highlighting it?
Quality architect.
Yeah.
That's one of those things where I have no idea what that really means. I mean, really. It's something that sounds really good. Architects are good. Quality is good. But what it means to be a quality architect, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. If it means tester, it prompts me to express, honestly, a little bit of irritation. Just why don't you just say tester? Why don't you just say tester? If it's somebody who, maybe it means somebody who's a really, really good architect. Well, okay, that's good. It's always good if you're going to be an architect. It's good to be a quality architect. It might mean somebody who's designing quality processes for a company. Well, if that's true, that'd be a good thing too, but you better have some designated responsibility for that. I think, quality architecture, if you're designing quality stuff for a company, it seems to me that that's a management role, right? And because you can't make it stick. You can architect all the quality you like, but until you've got a means of enabling it and supporting it and mandating it, it's not going to go very far. It seems to me. Maybe it means quality cheerleader. Okay, but I would like to do something more than quality cheerleading. So I have a natural aversion to titles that don't make a whole bunch of sense. The canonical example of that is there are garbage collectors in the world. How they came to be called sanitation engineers, I'm not sure I understand, because by that token, a plumber is a sanitation engineer too, and so is somebody who designs plumbing systems. I guess you could think in terms of somebody who designs hand washing programs for kids in school. That person's a sanitation engineer too. I love it when people say what they mean, and I get irritated when they inflate a title or obscure what the actual job is. So I'm if the person asking the question could outline maybe a little bit more clearly what they think a quality engineer is, my first reaction would probably be to propose a title that actually gets to the heart of it more. That's my point of view. Yours may differ.
Yeah. Okay. thanks a lot. So it was very long webinar. So usually we were doing a webinar for, yeah. And so, Michael, thanks a lot. Thank you very, very much for accepting my invitation and joining and making this day very beautiful. And everyone, I think, was taking notes of what to read and what to work and what knowledge to gain from this webinar. So it was awesome for me. It was very nice to talk with you again, and I hope to see you in Armenia very soon when this COVID-19 will be over from the world.
Yeah, last time we saw each other was what, Constantinople or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, we met there. So it was 2 years ago.
Ooh, a
Yeah.
little more than that, I think.
Yeah, maybe 3.
Quite a few years since I've been to Turkey, but you know,
Yeah.
I could come back. Once we're all moving again, it would be a pleasure to see you. I hope we get that chance.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining our webinar. And
Thank you, everyone.
okay. So talk to you very soon.
Hope so. All the best.
Also, all the best.
Sure.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.